There are many angles with which you can look at personal growth, self-improvement, and mindsets. People often look at them from the point of view of outcomes, whether that might be success in relationships or their health or wealth, maybe things like social status and power or getting their ideas adopted. I think what is possibly the most important aspect of any potential way that you would look at mindsets is the concept of free will, the freedom to choose. And we can quickly apply that to growth and fixed mindset thinking. Fixed mindset is the complete lack of choice. I can't choose my skills, I can't choose my passions and interests, I can't choose my emotions or my reactions. With a fixed mindset, we are merely a reactive entity at the complete control of the world around us. We are basically a puppet, and our master is whatever our situation happens to be. By building a growth mindset is about building our own free will and autonomy to control our situation, to take ownership of our outcomes in life, and more importantly, to control our happiness and contentedness. So, hello and welcome to the Growth Mindset Psychology Podcast with me, Sam Webster Harris, diving deep into the real science of self-improvement and uncovering the psychology behind building a life well lived. Today we have a fascinating episode on the topic of our consciousness and how it operates on our behaviors and how we choose the things we choose, and really understanding at a very deep level what free will is, how it operates on our life, and what are the circumstances where we actually get to use free will, and then how can we build a lot more free will into our life so that we can have more autonomy. It's going to be a deep episode and with a lot of very important take-homes, so I hope you stay tuned to find out more. Firstly, welcome to all the new listeners lately. It's a pleasure to have you around, and welcome back to any long-time listeners. I always say that to truly understand one aspect of psychology, such as mindsets, you actually need to understand all psychology. Of course, to overcome defensiveness and to feel comfortable with vulnerability, you need to understand the psychology of safety in trauma, things like attachment theory. You need to understand the power of social influence on your behaviors and the role of ego and your identity. Equally, let's say you wanted to understand self-sabotaging behaviors, we might need to understand emotional intelligence, behavior change, the neuroscience of learning. And so far, I've only mentioned defensiveness and self-sabotage, which are just two aspects of growth mindset. So I think I've made the point. The devil is really in the details. The beauty of the growth mindset theory is it sounds so simple and it is intuitively understandable. But the basic theory that talent and outcomes can be improved through dedicated effort, reflection, and hard work, that theory is just the tip of the iceberg. And to truly grasp and practice the concept at a deep level, we do need to go through the underlying building blocks of how the mind works. That means looking at brain development and personality traits to hedonic adaptation and cognitive biases. So hopefully I have piqued your curiosity enough to join me today as we dive into the concept of consciousness itself and free will. This episode is going to be a big one, and I wanted to just set some expectations early that we are going to have some big ideas and abstract concepts to wrestle with that might feel a little bit mind-boggling because they are mind-boggling, but they will add up to some very actionable take-homes, new patterns of thinking, and more freedom in your thinking and freedom to choose. And I gave that extra bit of prelude to make it very clear that I am going to go deep into some details that might feel a little weird and unrelated to growth mindset for a while, but I do promise you I will bring it all together and it will make absolute sense and you'll be grateful for going on the journey. We're going on an extensive tour from the basics of our default behaviors and addictions and the role that consciousness plays in our actions to then discuss the concept of free will and analyze how much we really have and when we have free will and when we don't. And you might think that free will is an obvious thing that we just have, but trust me, it isn't obvious and we don't have it most of the time. And finally, once we have developed a very strong idea of the few places in life that we truly do have free will, we're going to learn how to build more of it and thus expand our own autonomy in life, build our growth mindset, live a life with more happiness, more contentedness, and a greater sense of control and peace. So stay tuned, because it's going to be a profound and really important episode to dig into. So starting at the start, when we think of our consciousness, we think of this architect that is in control of our behaviors. Because we have consciousness, that means we have free will. Well, I want to look at some case studies from Charles Duhigg's book, In the Power of Habit. He has a really interesting chapter on the concept of free will. He first talks about the story of a man named Brian Thomas, who killed his wife by strangling her to death. But it was proven that he was actually asleep. It turns out he was a registered sleepwalker who regularly did all sorts of odd things whilst asleep, and he had no memory of these things, whether that would be driving his car, weeing on the carpet, cooking, taking a shower, all sorts of strange things. But one issue that psychologists have found with sleepwalkers is that they sometimes have sleep terrors. And that's an event where the sleepwalker has a nightmare and acts on it whilst they are walking about. And they might run away, they might throw things out a window. And sadly, in the case of Brian Thomas, he actually strangled his wife, and he had to live with that for the rest of his life. Now, of course, his consciousness was offline. So we find it incredibly easy to sympathize with Brian, because he was in a terrible situation. He had no free will in his actions. And yes, they were very much his actions, but we don't blame him for them as such. However, now we can look at a different case, the case of Angie Barkman. She has a different story. She was a lonely housewife with nothing to do after her kids left home. She found that letting herself go to the local casino for a few hours on a Friday afternoon gave her a thrill, some social community, a break from the dull repetition of sitting at home. And she liked to keep things sensible. She had rules, and with those rules, that stopped her from getting out of control. It also allowed her to enjoy a bit of excitement at a healthy level regularly. And over time, she actually became very good, and she even won a good amount of money sometimes. But it does only take a few slip-ups to get into a spiral, and down the line, she suddenly found that her habit that she was in control of, she was no longer in control of. She gambled away pretty much her entire life savings and got into debt. And there's an interesting study on compulsive gamblers. They are shown to have a slightly different response to the outcome of a gamble compared to the average person. So a normal person will feel a reward if they win something, of course, and they will feel a loss when they lose, whether they lose by a clear amount or whether they almost win but then just happen to lose. It is still a loss in their brain. But gambling addicts feel a reward when they almost win. If the slot machine just misses out on the payout in the last half a second, their brain lights up anyway and goes, yeah, that was cool, do more of that behavior. And sadly, Angie was in the compulsive gambler group. Once she realized her problems, she moved with her husband to a new state where gambling was completely illegal so that she could rebuild her life in peace. A few years later, her parents passed away, leaving her $1 million between a house and their savings. And not only was Angie rebuilding her life, she also had the capacity to enjoy herself and do different things. But suddenly, many different casinos were calling her with offers that she found hard to refuse. She did initially refuse them, but eventually she accepted a free stay for her and 5 friends in a luxury suite in Vegas, all expenses paid, even with gig tickets to go with it, and a free bar. And of course, it was a delight for her to take her friends out and live a little. And who says no to a completely free, all expenses paid gig tickets and hotel package? I mean, you come on, you'd be mad. Well, after this, the offers kept coming, and she did enjoy the odd gambling holiday, but she even got offers for free chips, and who can avoid free money? Especially when she was actually quite good at playing and she often won really well. So the story continues. And before she knew it, she had some really big wins, 50 grand, even 100 grand, but also some big losses. And slowly over time, things fell out of favor slightly and she started to eat into her savings. One night she had a really big losing streak and she ended up almost completely broke, but the casino offered to loan her money. And she accepted that. She signed on the line to give up her house and possessions if she didn't make it back. And she did make it back. She won it all. But then She didn't, and at 6 a.m, she had lost everything, including her house. And now, and you may think this was all her fault, or you may not, but the point is that her consciousness was online for the entire experience. So that should mean her free will was completely hers the whole time. But did she really control her desires to fill her time with enjoyment when she was bored? Did she control her desire to be helpful when a casino employee called her to say that he might lose his job if she didn't come along for the weekend and use her free chip allowance? Did she control the way her brain rewarded her when she almost won something but lost? When it comes to free will, she used her free will to move her entire life to a new state where gambling was illegal, yet was still unable to control her addiction. She'd made some very rational choices in life, but it still wasn't enough to build the life she wanted. Sometimes just having our consciousness online isn't enough to give us freedom. Whether you think this was entirely her fault or the result of manipulating behaviors of the gambling industry aligned against her, it doesn't matter. The point is that when we start to investigate this, we have some very hard questions to wrestle with: how much free will we truly have when it comes to our conscious decisions. Just because some of us can make the right decisions where others can't, I don't think that that's our place to judge them, when ultimately all of us have some form of guilty pleasures or addictions, or even a tendency to procrastinate and not do the thing we intend to do. And even though our consciousness is there, it isn't able to help us do the right decision that we want to do. It's merely along for the ride. And we're going to come back to explore consciousness more later. But let's first examine some limitations in free will and develop some ground truths on how much free will actually exists, if it even exists at all. Starting in the most fundamental place, free will in our actions is limited, of course, to the laws of physics. I don't have free will to become a chicken. I can't go driving my bicycle on Mars today. It's just not physically possible for me to do those things. Free will is also limited to our circumstances. Elon Musk, for example, could raise $1 billion for an idea he has, yet almost any other person, even with the same exact idea, wouldn't have that level of credibility. Or imagine someone who narrowly wins a presidential election. They have all the powers of a president. Someone who narrowly loses the presidential election has none of those powers, and that is their circumstances, whether they want them or not. Free will is, of course, also limited to social rules. I could approach random people on the street and ask them about their day. Absolutely. But it might be rude to ask them about their weight, and I might get arrested if I try to kiss them or do anything more than that. And it doesn't matter how much I want to do that, I still can't do it. Free will is also dependent on other people's free will. I might want to have a conversation about how incredible my cat is. I might desire that people should listen to me for hours with joy and be fascinated at the intricacies of when my cat is hungry, but sometimes he still doesn't eat his food because he just wants attention, and which cushion is his favorite. But if no one wants to listen to me, that is their free will, and I can't get what I want merely through the act of wanting it. So far, it's obvious that we have free will to try an action, but we don't get to choose the response to them. I can try and do something illegal. I can try and kiss people. I can try and talk to them for hours about my cats, but I can't choose if they want that to happen and if that gets accepted. In the same way that I can't click my fingers and break all the laws of physics and become a chicken, I can't magic 1 million subscribers out of thin air who don't want to listen to me. Sadly, you don't earn subscribers by turning up. You earn them by creating something that other people's free will wants them to also turn up to witness. So it seems so far that we have free will in our desires, and on top of that, we have free will to perform socially acceptable and physically possible actions to reach those desires, but we still don't control the results. However, now we'll visit the work of the other Sam Harris, who may or may not be slightly better known than me for his thinking on the topic of free will. He did write an entire book on it after all. Well, he states that you don't actually choose the inputs into your mind in the first place. So how are you really choosing the outputs? Your intention to do one thing and not another does not originate in your consciousness. Rather, it just appears in your consciousness, as does any thought or impulse that you might impose on your consciousness. And when we think about it, you cannot decide your next mental state or your next thought. I can't decide when I go to bed if I'm going to just go to bed straight away, or if some annoying thing will pop into my head and I'll ruminate about it. Maybe I'll suddenly feel sad about no one wanting to listen to me talking about my cats, and I'll be obsessed with it all night. Not my choice, but it happens anyway. Where is the freedom in that process, or the freedom to decide my exact actions, such as going to sleep, when I don't control my desires to talk about my cat, which then drives my action of not being able to sleep? And I know it's hard to grasp, but we have to realize we don't control our desires, and we certainly don't control other external inputs. Sam Harris, the other one, asks us to consider what it would actually take to have free will. You would need to be aware of all the factors that determine your thoughts and actions, and you would need to be in complete control of all of these factors. Just because you can do what you want does not mean you have free will as such. And why? Because you are not consciously choosing what you want. You just simply want it. You didn't choose to like chocolate or to be attracted to the sorts of body type and gender and personality that you are attracted to. You just are. You can't explain why you want something, but you want it. And so choosing to do what you want, or choosing one want over another, does not mean you technically have free will, because your wants have been given to you. They have not been determined by you. So Sam Harris actually says that we make a mistake by separating our free will as a concept from our neural processes, because the neural processes in our brain that support consciousness and nudge all our actions to be what they are just as much a part of us as our conscious actions are. The machinery that drives our actions is just as real as the actions themselves. And so instead of thinking of some outer body conscious that decides what it wants and what it does, it really is just some different neural wiring in our head that has decided that this thing is safety, or this thing is tasty, or this thing is good, and we should try and get more of that. And our brain rewards us for going towards that desire. And we have to realize that we did not have complete control in how that wiring got laid in the first place. That I did mention this episode was going to get weird. I'm just going to pause for a moment to let off the gas and remind you that this is the difficult phase of the messy, weird thoughts we need to think about to then bring it all together and make stuff make more sense. Consider that when you tidy your room, and you really tidy like in a big way, you might need to get lots of stuff out and make a bigger mess first to then put it all together in a new, improved organization system and more tidiness. Well, right now we are ruffling a little bit through the chaos of consciousness and free will to find some clarity and deeper truths that we will then take forward and utilize to be more autonomous and free-thinking individuals. Don't you worry at all. We're going to take a quick break to talk about some of the sponsors that help me keep the show running, after which I'll do a quick regroup on the things we've learned so far to make sure we're all in the same place before we start diving further into the concept of our subconscious versus conscious thoughts. So we have just learned that we don't exactly control our desires because we don't control the basic neural structure of our innate desires. And that's because in the same way that we don't control what feels or tastes good, we also don't control our upbringing or the society we live in that gives us many of our opinions and desires. So at this point, I think it's really worth exploring more of our subconscious thoughts and the dual nature of the conscious and unconscious brain activity. And to start with, let's look at conscious and unconscious memories. It's easy for us to think of the vivid, picture-like recall of a memory, a place, an event. These are the conscious memories we have that, of course, influence us. They teach us things, whether that might be the memory of our grandparents or a recent vacation, the path we go on to walk our dog. Doesn't matter. We also have many subconscious memories. Things like learning to walk is a completely unconscious memory because we don't have any visual memories at all remaining from before we could walk. However, the mistakes that we made whilst we were learning trained our neural circuits to wire themselves to intuitively understand walking. Each fall we made or step we took that worked entrained our brain's neural circuits to be able to operate in our subconscious. And in a very similar way, we learn our perceptions of safety and attachment mostly before we are 6 months old. And that means that we understand in the world a lot of when we are safe and what our self-worth is, mainly through the training of deeply wired neural circuits that we have no memory of, yet they influence our everyday life and thoughts. For some people, admitting a mistake is as natural as talking about their opinion on a movie, whereas for other people, it might be a terribly vulnerable task to admit a mistake, and their body could physically react to it with a fight or flight response. And this is very important because a lot of our knowledge that we use to filter the world around us comes from these subconscious memories, how we think about the concepts of right and wrong. What is it worth spending time on? What makes us happy? Those are all concepts that were trained into us without much of our say. I'm sure maybe you enjoyed a subject at school because you had a lovely, inspiring teacher, but the year after you found that you didn't like the subject so much because you had a bad teacher. And there's no control from you on your part on whether you enjoyed the subject and choose to study it for the rest of your life. It's merely the act of having a teacher who isn't very interesting at the time. So your environment maybe informs the rest of your life. And we can go back to Sam Harris's work here on our concept of what our desires are. He says that it is impossible for us to know the causes of our choices and our wants. You wanted to lose weight for years, then one day you really wanted to lose weight. What's the difference? Whatever it is, it's not a difference that you personally brought into being. Yes, you can change your life and yourself through effort and discipline, but you have whatever capacity you have for effort and discipline at this moment, and that is all you have. You don't have a scintilla more or less. Now, I would add, doesn't mean you can't build it with a growth mindset. That's why we're discussing how you can build more free will. But his point is, however much determination or effort you're willing to put into something is the amount of determination and effort that you have to give. And so not only are we not as free as we think we are, we do not feel as free as we think we do much of the time. Many thoughts and intentions just simply arise in our mind. And what else could they do than just arise? That's how thoughts work. When we look at it, many people have a desire to eat less or smoke less, gamble less, or insert whatever your vice is here. They might often expect it to happen later when magically some more desire to really tackle the thing arrives, or perhaps some more discipline to enact on this priority that they've failed to make a priority so far. And quite often, the sad case is that our resolve and autonomy only appears for topics like our health when our health switches from being kind of okay to suddenly not okay. Heart attacks, cancer, things that will kill us if we don't stop our out-of-control behavior. That is often the nudge that will eventually make us make the change. And the key words are it making us, not us making us. So our free will, in fact, can almost kill us before we are able to take our own self-control. And it doesn't feel like free will and consciousness is actually that useful and is actually doing that much for us versus just automated behaviors that we happen to be along for the ride on. And it's certainly not helped by tobacco companies, gambling companies, and highly processed food. And these things aren't your friend. They are there to get you addicted and make money out of you. And they do that by giving us desires. And that, of course, brings us back to the question that is a desire we have really our own free will? And it's clear that it isn't, because people will keep eating food that is bad for them, and they'll be frustrated by their failed diets and their inability to control their health. And people are now very much willing to pay a lot of money for Wegovy and semaglutide injections to turn off those desires. And that is basically admitting that they are not able to build enough free will within themselves to choose the food they want to have eaten. And so they're paying for a drug to give them that free will, to give them autonomy, to choose to eat less. Now, I'm absolutely not judging anyone here. I'm saying that millions of people are able to admit to themselves they don't have free will and pay to build it. And that's, of course, why I'm doing an episode on how to build free will for yourself. And whether or not you've had difficulty with it, I have no intention of making anyone feel bad. I'm just making this point to illustrate that our desires can literally kill us. And perhaps I should say that less dramatically, our desires can cause us to procrastinate and put off useful things, or cause us to feel embarrassed when we want to look cool. And these are all desires that, again, we don't control. And Now, before you despair and conclude that there is no point in even trying because you don't have any free will at all, things are about to get a lot more empowering now that we move into the section of how to actually build our free will. I did have to go through first the essential lessons of demonstrating how little free will we have, so we know with a lot more accuracy what we're working with and working on, rather than just believing that we have some complete autonomy to do anything, because that is a false belief. It might even be a fixed mindset belief because you don't even notice the things you don't have choices of. And growth mindset is, of course, the curiosity to investigate the truths that are hard to examine. And so far, it's felt like free will has become a vanishingly small thing. But to examine where free will does reside, we can look at the work of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychologist and philosopher, who did a lot of very important work on how humans build a sense of meaning. He stated that free will is the space between stimulus and response. Now, of course, you can work on building different stimuli into your environment. That means living where you want, with who you want, doing what you want. But sadly, you still can't control when you get sick. You can't control if you lose a game of tennis or if the economy takes a nosedive. As Murphy's Law states, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible time. We're never going to control when things don't happen to go our way and our desires don't get fulfilled. Viktor Frankl spent his time with people in some of the worst situations that are possibly imaginable, with those locked into the prisoner of war camps. And he found that those who were able to believe in themselves and were accountable to their own internal situation fared much better than those who let their external environment control their internal environment, because everything from their external environment was just forcing them to crumble. And it's only if we are able to build that gap between our environment and the stimulus and our response, and insert our free will there, that we then start to choose what our responses are. And it is only when we're choosing how to respond that we actually have free will. Imagine, let's say, you always get incredibly angry every time a commercial break comes on. You get so angry, you punch a hole in the window or you'll punch anyone that's around you. You just want to break everything. Well, you'd be a very angry person if you watched a lot of TV. And if you wanted some more free will to get less angry, you could either watch less TV or learn to not let annoying adverts control your emotional state and react to them. Likewise, if you always eat cake when it is in the house, which is something I do, you have two options to build a sense of free will. You can stop putting cake in the house or find a way to control your intake of cake by locking it in a cake safe or investigating your habits and find other ways to reward yourself when you're triggered to eat the cake. And by far the easiest one is to just not bring cake into the house. But if I really had to, I could work out ways to have cake in the house that I couldn't eat it, if that was a really important thing I had to work on. Regardless of what it is you want to achieve, it's all about investigating the gap in between the stimulus and then your response. That is the only location where your free will exists. So some people fall into bad patterns in relationships, or others make self-sabotaging mistakes in their careers. And either way, there's probably a series of different stimulus or triggers that create their automatic responses. Allowing themselves to respond to those things, feeling those emotions, getting triggered, and then responding to them, that's not using free will. That's not having a growth mindset. That's assuming that their emotion is correct and that their corresponding actions that go with it are just what they have to do because that's what you do. Fixed mindset thinking is not recognizing our own abilities to change our situations and improve ourselves. If someone hurts you or puts you down, do you always defend yourself? Are you perhaps willing to let some things slide, but you just have principles of what truly isn't acceptable? Well, if that still gets you into fights, that is your problem. Now, of course, at this point, there's a lot more here that we could dive into, as there always is in psychology, and things like your attachment styles, perceptions of safety, how you scan your environment to be picking up on potential sources of danger the entire time. Those are some big areas to dig into that we don't have time for today. And then, of course, there is your ego and not wanting to be hurt. And perceptions of safety and ego are just two very giant ways that we rob ourselves of free will. Sadly, I can't talk for like 5 hours on this episode, but I do want to make the point that when we do lose free will, whether that's through ego and loss of our sense of personal safety or any other reason, if we are losing our free will, we are merely becoming a puppet to our environments. And a stimulus happens that we don't like, and we do a corresponding behavior that we don't actually really want to do and we want to have a choice, then that is our problem. In reality, it doesn't matter what it is that's causing us to have a poor response. We're just like the silly person watching TV and breaking everything every time they see an advert because they don't like adverts. Assuming that our response is something we have to do is our own problem. So hopefully that's starting to make a little bit more sense for you, neaten some things up. But there's more good news coming as we learn to build more control and autonomy into our lives. David Foster Wallace is a brilliant philosopher, and he's always worth spending some time on. He says that learning how to think really means learning how to exercise some control over how and what you think. So often we hold beliefs so tightly that we don't even realize they can be questioned. Arrogance, blind certainty, a closed-mindedness that's like an imprisonment that is so complete that the prisoner doesn't even know he's locked up. A huge percentage of the stuff that I tend to be automatically certain of is, it turns out, totally wrong and deluded. Our natural setting is to be deeply and literally self-centered. There is no single experience that you've ever had where you weren't at the absolute center of your experience. We see the whole world through the lens of our situation. And people who can understand this and adjust away from this natural self-centered setting are often described as people who are well-adjusted or mature, wise. And it's rare because it's extremely difficult to stay alert and attentive instead of getting hypnotized by the constant monologue inside your head that says that you are the most important thing and you are the only thing. Our natural default setting is to think that I am at the center of the world. My immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the rest of the world's priorities. But free will is about being aware enough to give yourself a choice. You can choose to look differently at life. If you've really learned how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. Just because you have an emotion that says something is dangerous or scary or something is good, it doesn't always mean it is. We can build a sense of curiosity to our default opinions. And if you listen to the Thinking Fast and Slow episode or the whole season on cognitive biases, you'll see that our mind is riddled with these heuristic and false fast-thinking beliefs that alter the way we see the world. It's only by learning to slow ourselves down and be deeper thinkers that builds our free will, builds our growth mindset, and an opportunity to be more in control of ourselves. Okay, so we're making good progress, but I would hate to fall into the trap of saying something that sounds simple, but it's actually really hard on a deep level, because I feel this is a problem with many self-improvement sources. So let's discuss some meaty, hard, difficult things like the topic of revenge. And we will dive into that after another short ad break. And hopefully this doesn't cause you any anger problems and you don't punch anyone. But if adverts do cause you problems, of course, you can feel free to skip them. Okay, let's dive into revenge and why we might be triggered and why we might get triggered to take revenge and what to do about it. I'm going to reference the psychologist Daniel Ariely here and a story from his brilliant book, The Upside of Irrationality. One day he was driving to Washington in his Audi when suddenly the accelerator was completely disengaged. It was like the car was just running in neutral. There was no power at all. He was in the middle lane with traffic coming up behind him on both lanes. And he wanted to get off the road, of course, but there were two big trucks bearing down on him on the right side. So he had to wait for them to pass. Then there was a bunch more cars behind the trucks and his car was continuing to slow down and he was generally starting to feel like he might die. But finally, with the car going just 30 miles an hour, there was a break in the traffic and he cuts to the right, makes it to the hard shoulder without anyone getting hurt, which is good. Bad that his car is broken and it turns out there's nothing he can do to get the car fixed and it has to get towed. He later calls Audi and tells them the story and his absolute terror through the entire situation. The customer service agent listens without any engagement, probably listened to plenty of people already talking about their problems. Once he's finished telling her this story, she reads off some standard text of, "We're very sorry for the inconvenience," and they'll try and get the car fixed at some point. Dan, now being in Washington, needs to get home by traveling a few states back to where he lives. And Audi say that they can't help him at all because they have him registered as living in Washington anyway. He says that he moved house 3 years ago but they don't really care. He asks why he now has to pay for their inability to update their records, and she says that it's just they have a policy that they use their own records and they can't help him any further, and really don't seem to want to bother to help him any further. Now he's there, having been nearly killed by an accident from this company, and they don't even care to listen to him or help him. He is understandably feeling a bit mad and revengeful. But what he did was instead contemplate on his feelings. He didn't go on a rampage or try to bankrupt Audi. He conducted a series of experiments on the concept of revenge, because he was surprised by how overwhelmed his own feeling was that he would be interested to see and study what that's like for other people. And he found that when people get pissed off during customer service interactions, they are happy to cheat the customer service agent or the business itself or even other customers of the service just to get a feeling of revenge. Now, of course, that doesn't mean all people want to get revenge. It means that most people, most of the time, will seek ways to hurt others if they are feeling hurt, even if it is impractical for them and genuinely has a cost to themselves. But of course, it's not very useful a lot of the time. Let's say Daniel tried to file a lawsuit against Audi for their negligence. At a minimum level, he's going to be spending months as an angry person trying to sue a company, and he'll be paying lawyers himself out of his pocket until he perhaps wins, but he might not even win and he might lose a ton of money in the process, because actually, cars do break. What he found in his research is that even if we can't control that we might get annoyed about something, we can do something other than just try to take revenge by damaging the other person. We can take revenge in a different way, through our own successes. When Jeffrey Katzenberg was fired from being chairman of Disney Studios, he didn't sue Disney, he didn't try to bankrupt them or anything. Instead, he built DreamWorks, and he created the movie Shrek, the anti-fairy tale movie, which made fun of Disney in the process, but it wasn't exactly an act to ruin Disney. But it did very much build Jeffrey Katzenberg's own levels of success in life. And even Daniel, the psychologist, with his car issue, he channeled his frustrated energy into researching the problem of revenge and frustration, and he created new knowledge in psychology and did something useful with that energy. So whether you're going through a bad breakup in life or your boss hasn't treated you properly, it's not going to be improved by hurting others, when instead you can work on living your own best life. And again, as I've been saying, free will is the gap between a stimulus and the response. Something super frustrating happens. Do you fall into anger and lash out, or do you channel your energy productively into just advancing yourself? It's a fixed mindset action to blame the world and act from a sense of scarcity. Like there are only so many good outcomes out there and the other person has taken all the goodness and you have to steal it back from them. And there's another way of looking at the world, that is with a growth mindset, where you take ownership of your own situation, you improve your own outcomes, you believe in the abundance to just build your own goodness without caring whether or not you've lost something in the process to someone else. And yes, I'm still not going to say it's easy, but it's an area a lot of people struggle with. And it is something that could be a source of joy and goodness in our life, as opposed to a source of problems and things that make our life worse and perhaps lead to self-sabotaging behaviors. Okay, so hopefully that one made sense to you, because it's a really important point. And we can finally move on to discussing the concept of pain. I'm going to draw on some research from Dan Ariely again, because besides being nearly killed in his Audi, he did actually have a terrible accident with an explosion that caused third-degree burns over 70% of his body when he was quite young. The recovery process took him years and he was in a lot of pain, so naturally pain was a topic that interested him. Much like feelings of revenge that overwhelm us into automatic behaviors without our free will, it can be the same with pain. We're built, of course, to feel pain on purpose so that we protect ourselves from danger. A hot stove, a sharp knife, falling over. The pain that any of those things gives us teaches us to not damage our body further and keeps us safe. But when we build our pain threshold, that can be associated with building free will a little bit. Nir Eyal, the psychologist, reminds us that time management is basically pain management, and being able to suffer the pain of doing a difficult thing over choosing to act on our simple desires means that we can manage our time better. And of course, our free will. And something you find studying Buddhist monks, and I also learned by doing the 10-day Vipassana meditation practice, is the lessons they have on the non-reactivity to pain. People assume that the hard part of sitting still and meditating for silence in 10 days is the boredom. And it isn't in slightest a bit boring, firstly, trust me. And the hard part is actually the pain. If you haven't done this, it's hard to actually explain to anyone just how painful it is. Like, you can't imagine the levels of pain your body will feel if you sit completely still for 2 hours in a row. And I've snapped my femur, which is apparently one of the most painful things you can physically go through. And yes, when I was being moved around with a snapped femur, it was worse than sitting still and meditating. But when I wasn't moving around, I would say it was about even. It was a horrendous feeling in my leg, which is about as horrendous as the worst moments of the meditation periods. And you might think I'm exaggerating because, you sit still all the time to watch movies, but you will honestly have never sat still for more than a few minutes in your life. You're moving a little bit every few minutes because you'll get a little niggle and you'll move a bit. And if you still doubt me, try and sit still for 1 hour right now and see what the pain is like, because I guarantee that if you haven't been practicing it, you won't be able to do it. It takes most people at least 4 or 5 days of doing 8 sessions of hour-long meditations before they can actually sit still for a whole hour. And that's not actually because it becomes less painful. That's because of the whole time they're doing it, they're learning to deal with the pain. The practice of clearing your mind in meditation is not just emptying the mind from what it's thinking about all the time. It suddenly starts to become a battle of emptying the mind from the pain it's feeling, or at least not paying attention to it and obsessing over it. You learn the art of not reacting to the pain you're feeling, and instead you can observe the pain for a bit and try to let it pass. And ultimately, you'll find that all things do come to pass. And often you'll have the sensation when you're sitting there that your leg is on fire, or that it feels like it's going to break if you don't do something about it. But the sensation might pass and go away. Sometimes it doesn't, and you just have to sit there in severe pain. But at least at the end of every meditation session, it will end, and you will be able to get up and walk, or maybe you won't be able to walk for a few minutes, but eventually your leg will recover, and then you will walk again, and you'll be fine. So you learn that reacting to that pain won't achieve anything different to what will come up eventually anyway, so you can wait. You can stop trying to control things and instead learn to control your reactions to things. And as I've said several times, free will is the space between a stimulus and the response. And the stimulus that you are experiencing is your insanely painful legs, and the default response is, of course, to move them. But you can learn to wait, and you can build that gap between your stimulus and the response. And by building that gap, you are, of course, building the art of free will. And that's why Buddhist monks, if they really are practicing properly, won't get annoyed by things going wrong in their life. They will be able to accept them and be curious about them without reacting. It doesn't mean they don't have emotions. It means they are just curious about their emotions and they don't let their emotions drive their behaviors. A curious thing is that they don't feel the sensation of pain any less. The pain isn't any lower as such. They can just sit there and observe it and know whether they need to react to it or not. And you'll find that over the 10 days, you'll actually develop a much deeper awareness and intricate sensations of all the different types of pain your body can experience. You'll have a much deeper connection and vaster map of all of your body. And it's very strange and unexpected. And in the same way, people can get frustrated when they're told to react less to their emotions and think that they're being told to ignore their emotions and stop feeling them, to numb themselves to their emotions and to the world. And you'll find that's often why people fall into using drugs habitually. But just numbing yourself to your emotions isn't useful in the same way that numbing yourself to the sensation of pain isn't useful for you. That's the opposite of what you need to do. You should totally feel your emotions in their full aspect and observe your emotions and be curious about your emotions. And when you don't respond instantly to them with your default judgment of what they mean, you can spend more time investigating them curiously, and you'll find much greater textures behind them and much deeper levels of why you might be feeling that way. You might be annoyed because you're feeling unsafe about something, and then you can investigate why you might be feeling unsafe about that thing, or why something is triggering you to feel scared. And that might start to give you some more insights on what are the things you really need to work on instead of reacting automatically and defensively or aggressively towards them. And it builds you a lot more space to think with much more wisdom and maturity about what your responses really should be in different events. And what has pain got to do with it? Well, when something annoys you in your environment, that is a feeling. You then get a feeling within your body, just like the feeling of pain. And you can react to this feeling inside you. But if you built that gap by practicing free will with your feelings of pain, you then have the chance to act with logic against any feeling that arises within you and decide if you want to act on that feeling through the default way or decide a different way by applying some logic and thinking about the end results that you want rather than your short-term need to go and do the instant thing that gets sparked by the stimulus. When we run through life not questioning our reactions to pain and not questioning our reactions to our emotions, we don't have free will because we are just instantly reacting to any stimulus. But if we realize we are not our emotions, we can then start to live with more peace and more purpose and react how we want to. That means we can make decisions that help us feel content and happy in our long-term choices because we made them using our own free will rather than performing actions that are just the result of being buffeted about by the world, but thinking that we have the free will to get annoyed by them, even though actually what we're doing is causing ourselves problems and not working towards the things that are our real priorities. Now, of course, you might not want to go and meditate for 10 days, but you can still work on the art of non-reactivity and build your tolerance to physical pain and emotional pain and frustration. There are plenty of options, but this would be many more podcasts to dig into. I can recommend highly the series I did on Stoicism or reading any books from Stoicism, as well as the podcasts in May with Stephen Stein on emotional intelligence and hardiness. And I'm also going to do some episodes coming up on our fight and flight responses, trauma, how our nervous system responds to threats, and polyvagal theory, because they are all huge parts of a growth mindset when you consider that to build free will for ourselves, we need to learn how to control our reactivity. So don't worry, I have got you covered. And now let's just quickly examine what we've learned and put it all together. A fixed mindset is essentially the act of giving up your free will, living a life determined by your circumstances. Growth mindset is taking ownership of your results and happiness in life by taking ownership for your own capacity to choose your responses to any setback or good thing that happens in your life. You can walk your own path. The concept that we commonly refer to as free will is mostly an illusion. We don't have choices on almost anything in our existence, but we can build our free will by focusing on the small little aspects of free will that we do have, which is in the gap between our stimuluses, the things that happen to us, and our responses to those events. Now, of course, we don't have to work on that, but if we don't, we're never truly actually building our free will and really having a growth mindset. Fixed mindset thinking would say, yes, I have to get angry because this person wronged me. Growth mindset would say, I can do something productive with this anger that doesn't cause me further problems, because I can choose how I respond to things. Or let's say you're bad at something, a fixed mindset would say, I'm not good at this, I don't want to look stupid, this thing isn't for me. Whereas the growth mindset would say, I'm not good at this yet, and I'm willing to look stupid to get better. Ultimately, having a growth mindset is the act of practicing free will and building it, which is why I think the growth mindset is so important and one of the reasons why I run this podcast. So thank you so much for listening. And if you feel like I've given you anything to ponder and you have friends that get irrationally angry at TV adverts, well, share this episode with them to remind them that they're being stupid. And I do know that I gave you a lot of information today, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, because digging into the edges of our perception, what drives our decisions, where we can find our internal locus of control is just so important. If you are massively into your books, I reference several authors, so I'll just give them a quick shout out. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Free Will by Sam Harris. Also, I didn't mention it, but I'm currently reading Conscious by Anneka Harris, who is actually Sam Harris's wife. There was also The Upside of Irrationality by Daniel Ariely, and The Map is Mostly Water by David Foster Wallace. Alrighty, thanks for listening. I have tried recording a new outro, by the way, with the goal of helping people smile and feel good about themselves whilst also learning a bit more. So if you can do me a favor and listen to the rest of the outro, I would super appreciate that. But you don't have to. Stay awesome and work on your free will. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
Studies show we need time for information to sink in, so I'm going to give you a 5-second pause, silence, to reflect on one idea from the show before you jump back into your busy life. Ready and go.